Hello and welcome to Daily News Simplified, where we take up important articles of the day from the newspaper and discuss them in detail as per the demands of Civil Services exam. Articles covered today are displayed on your screen and their notes in PDF and Word format are provided in the description box down below. Without further ado, let us begin. Starting off with the first article of the day, which appeared in the explained section of the Indian Express on 24th of April. Now, this date, 24th of April 2023, holds a special significance in India's legal jurisprudence because this date marks 50 years since the Supreme Court of India delivered its verdict in Kesavananda Bharati vs. State of Kerala case. This judgment is widely recognized as a milestone in India's history because in this, the Supreme Court held that the Parliament's power to amend the Constitution was not unlimited, and that any changes which damages the document's basic structure would be declared void by it. Now, this judgment has helped preserve the essence of our republic. The importance of this topic can be gauged by the fact that UPSC in GS paper 2 has highlighted the topic basic structure under the framework of Indian Constitution. Further, you can see from this mains PYQ in GS paper 2, where in the year 2019, a question appeared on Parliament's power to amend the Constitution and held that it cannot be enlarged into an absolute power, and we needed to explain the statement in light of the doctrine of basic structure. In the year 2014 as well, a question appeared on the basic structure, while in the prelims paper, a question appeared in the year 2020 where a candidate was expected to know about the basic structure as well as the scope of judicial review around it. Now, in order to understand the concept of basic structure, we will have to move sequentially. This will include, first, understanding the procedure of amendment of the Constitution. Then, we'll move forward to understand the genesis of the doctrine of basic structure with the help of Supreme Court judgments. Further, we will discuss the current ambit of the term along with its merit and demerits before concluding. Now, how is a constitution amended? Like any other written constitution, the Constitution of India provides for its amendment in order to adjust itself to the changing conditions and needs. However, the procedure laid down for its amendment is neither as easy as in UK nor as difficult as in USA. Thus, in other words, the Indian Constitution is neither flexible nor rigid but a synthesis of both. The Article 368 of Part 20 of the Constitution deals with the powers to amend the Constitution and its procedure. It states that the Parliament may exercise of its constituent power, may by way of addition, variation, or repeal any provision of the Constitution in accordance with the procedure laid down for the purpose. Now, what is the procedure to amend the Constitution? Let us have a look. Now, the procedure for the amendment of the Constitution, as laid down in the Article 368 of the Constitution, is as follows. An amendment of the Constitution can be initiated only by an introduction of the amendment bill in either of the houses of the Parliament. However, they cannot be introduced in the state legislatures. The bill can be introduced either by a minister or by a private member and does not require the prior permission of the President. The bill must be passed in each house by a special majority, that is, majority of the total membership of the house as well as 2/3 of the members who are present and voting. Each house must pass the bill separately. In case of disagreement between the two houses, there is no provision of holding a joint sitting of the two houses for the purpose of deliberation and passage of the bill. If the bill seeks to amend the federal provisions of the Constitution, it must also be ratified by the state legislatures, that is, half of the states by a simple majority, that is, the majority of members
present and voting. The President must give assent to the bill. He can neither withhold nor return the bill for reconsideration of the Parliament. Only after the President's assent, the bill becomes an act. Now, what are the types of amendment of the Constitution? Let's have a look. The Article 368 of the Constitution provides for two types of amendments, that is, by special majority of the Parliament, as well as special majority combined with ratification of half of the state legislatures. But there are some articles that provides for amendment of certain provisions of the Constitution by simple majority of the Parliament, that is, majority of members of each house present and voting. Notably, these amendments are not deemed to be amendments of the Constitution under the Article 368. These provisions include admission or establishment of new states, formation of new states, and alteration of boundaries, areas, or names of existing states, abolition and creation of legislative councils in the state, amendment to the second schedule, fifth and sixth schedule also falls out of the purview of Article 368. Whereas the majority of the provisions in the Constitution need to be amended by special majority of the Parliament, that is, majority of membership as well as two-thirds of members who are present and voting. Provisions such as fundamental rights, directive principle of state policies are covered under this provision only. The second type of amendment under the Article 368 is when the provisions of the Constitution which are related to the federal structure of the polity, these can be altered through this type of an amendment. This kind of an amendment requires passage of the Constitution Amendment Bill by a special majority of the Parliament and also requires the consent of at least half of the state legislatures by simple majority. If one or some or all of the remaining states take no action on the bill, it does not matter. The moment half of the states give their consent, this formality is completed. Also, there is no time limit within which the states should give their consent to the bill. The following provisions can be amended this way. The first is election of the President and its manner. The second is extent of executive power of the Union and states. Also, distribution of legislative powers between the Union and states can be amended by this provision. Further, matters regarding to Supreme Courts and High Courts, Goods and Services Tax Council, any of the list under the 7th schedule of the Parliament, representation of the states in the Parliament, as well as power of the Parliament to amend the Constitution under the Article 368 is done by this kind of majority. Again, let us note that these both kind of amendment falls under the purview of Article 368. Now, let us look at the emergence of the doctrine of basic structure. Now, the extent of Parliament's power to amend the Constitution was the backdrop of tussle between the executive and the judiciary in the first 2 decades of the Republic. In its judgment in the first strings of cases, the Supreme Court viewed the power to amend the Constitution as unlimited, but this view changed subsequently. The question whether fundamental rights can be amended by the Parliament under the Article 368 came for consideration of the Supreme Court within the first year of the Constitution coming into force. In Shankari Prasad case of the year 1951, the constitutional validity of the First Amendment, which curtailed the right to property, was challenged. The Supreme Court, it ruled that the power of the Parliament to amend the Constitution under the Article 368 also includes the power to amend the fundamental rights. The word law under the Article 13 included only ordinary laws and not the Constitutional Amendment Acts. Therefore, Parliament can abridge or take away any of the fundamental rights by enacting a Constitutional Amendment Act, and such law will not be void under the Article 13. However, in Golaknath case of the 1967, the Supreme Court reversed its earlier stand. In that case, the constitutional validity of 17th Amendment Act of 1964, which inserted 9th schedule, was challenged. The Supreme Court ruled that the fundamental rights are given a transcendental and immutable position. Hence, the Parliament cannot abridge or take away any of these rights. A constitutional amendment is also a law within the meaning of Article 13, and hence it would be void for violating any of the fundamental rights. The Parliament responded to the Supreme Court judgment in the Golaknath case by enacting 24th Amendment Act of the year 1971. This act amended Article 13 and Article 368 and declared that the Parliament has the power to take away any of the fundamental rights under the Article 368, and such act will not be under the meaning of Article 13. It meant that Parliament gave itself the power to amend any part of the Constitution, and it passed a law that it cannot be reviewed by the courts. This scope of the power to amend, especially when the right of property, which at the time was a fundamental right, was impacted by the land ceiling laws. And this particular provision was centrally challenged in Kesavananda Bharati case. In Kesavananda Bharati case of the year 1973, the Supreme Court overruled the judgment of Golaknath case. It upheld the validity of 24th Amendment Act and stated that Parliament has the power to abridge or take away any of the fundamental rights. However, at the same time, it laid down a new doctrine called Doctrine of Basic Structure. This doctrine meant that the constituent power of the Parliament under 368 does not enable it to alter the basic structure of the Constitution. This means that Parliament cannot abridge or take away a fundamental right that forms a part of basic structure of the Constitution. The Parliament further reacted to Kesavananda Bharati case by bringing in the 39th Amendment Act in the year 1975. This Amendment Act barred the Supreme Court from hearing challenges regarding elections of the office of President, Vice President, Prime Minister, as well as Speaker of the Lok Sabha. However, Supreme Court in Indira Gandhi vs. Raj Narayan case in the year 1975 struck down this provision of 39th Amendment Act. The court said that this provision was beyond the amending power of the Parliament as it affected the basic structure of the Constitution. Again, the Parliament reacted to this judicially innovated doctrine of basic structure by enacting the 42nd Amendment Act of 1976. This act amended the provision of Article 368 and declared that there is no limitation on the constituent power of the Parliament, and that no amendment can be questioned in any court or any grounds, including that of contravention of any of the fundamental rights. However, the Supreme Court in Minerva Mills case of the year 1980 invalidated this above provision because it excluded the judicial review, which is a basic structure of the Constitution. By applying the doctrine of basic structure with respect to Article 368, Court held that the Constitution has conferred a limited amending power to the Parliament, and the Parliament cannot, under the exercise of this limited power, enlarge that very power into an absolute power. Further, in Vaman Rao case of the year 1981, the Supreme Court adhered to this doctrine of basic structure and further clarified that it would apply to all the amendments enacted after the date of Kesavananda Bharati judgment, that is April 24th, 1973. Now, after understanding the evolution of the basic structure, let us understand how the Supreme Court has applied this doctrine. Since the year 1973, that was the year of Kesavananda Bharati judgment, the Constitution has been amended for more than 60 times. In these 5 decades, the Supreme Court tested constitutional amendments against the doctrine of basic structure in at least 16 of these cases. In 9 of these 16 cases, the Supreme Court upheld the constitutional amendments that had been challenged on the grounds of violation of basic structure. 6 of these relate to reservations, including quotas for other backward classes and economically weaker sections, and reservations in promotions. The Supreme Court has struck down a constitutional amendment in its entirety only once, that was the 99th Constitutional Amendment Act of the year 2014, which established the National Judicial Appointment Commission, or the NJAC, a body that would have been responsible for the appointment and transfer of judges, replacing the current collegium system. The amendment was struck down by a constitutional bench on the ground that it threatened the judicial independence, which, according to the court, was a basic feature of the constitution. In 6 instances since 1973, including the Kesavananda Bharati ruling itself, the Supreme Court has partially struck down a constitutional amendment. In all these cases, the provision that was struck down related to denial of judicial review. In Kyoto Holohan case, which dealt with 10th schedule of the Constitution, the only portion of the amendment that was struck down was the one that the decision of the Speaker relating to disqualification cannot be judicially reviewed. In Rajendra N. Shah case, the court struck down a portion of 97th Amendment Act. This Amendment Act changed the legal regime for cooperative societies, and the court ruled that cooperative societies within a state as opposed to interstate would fall under the state list, which meant that a constitutional amendment relating to it must be ratified by half of the states as prescribed by the constitution. In Kesavananda Bharati case, while the court upheld the land ceiling laws, it struck down a portion of 25th Amendment Act, which stated that if any law is passed to give the effect to directive principles, it cannot be deemed to be void on the ground that it takes away or abrogates any of the rights contained in Article 14, 19 or 31. In P. Sambhamurthy case versus State of Andhra Pradesh, the Supreme Court struck down a portion of 32nd Amendment Act, which constituted an administrative tribunal for Andhra Pradesh for service matters, taking away the jurisdiction of High Court. In L. Chandra Kumar case of 1997, the Supreme Court struck down a portion of 42nd Amendment Act, which set up administrative tribunals, excluding the judicial review by high courts. The present position is that the Parliament, under the Article 368, can amend any part of the Constitution, including the fundamental rights, but without affecting the basic structure of the Constitution. However, Supreme Court is yet to define or clarify what constitutes a basic structure. But from various judgments, following have emerged as basic features of the Constitution or elements of the basic structure of the Constitution. These are supremacy of the Constitution, sovereign, democratic and republican nature of Indian polity, secular character of the Constitution, separation of powers between legislature, executive and judiciary, federal character of the Constitution, unity and integrity of the nation, the concept of welfare, that is, socio-economic justice, the power of courts to take judicial review, freedom and dignity of the individual, parliamentary system of governance in the country, rule of law, the harmony or the balance between the fundamental rights and directive principle of the state policies, principle of equality, ensuring free and fair elections in the country, as well as independence of judiciary. However, this doctrine of basic structure has seen its fair share of criticism and arguments in its favor. What are these? Let us explore. Over the decades, the basic structure doctrine has been criticized repeatedly for diluting the principle of separation of power, as well as for being vague and subjective form of judicial review. The first criticism that this doctrine faces is due to the legitimacy of the judgment, as the verdict was given by a very thin margin of 7 judges in its favor, while 6 of the judges dissented. This doctrine came into existence by vote of just one judge. The judiciary has not given the exhaustive list of what constitutes the basic structure. This means that the judiciary enjoys a discretionary power. Further, this doctrine has also been criticized as an extreme example of judicial creativity. Instead of limiting itself to the written provisions, the judiciary is trying to establish a metaphysical element of the Constitution. This metaphysical approach of the basic structure disturbs the separation of powers, establishing judicial sovereignty. Further, the judiciary is the least representative and the most elitist of the institutions, thus being least accountable, hence assuming the role of super legislature, which is unsuitable for a democracy. Since the entire spectrum of doctrine of basic structure remains undefined, it creates uncertainty and discretion, thus affecting the working of executives. However, there are some arguments in the favor of doctrine of basic structure. This fundamental structure serves as an evidence for the constitutional thesis that the majority rule by force cannot destroy the core of Constitution of India. As Parliament too is created by the Constitution, therefore it can have only such powers that are expressly vested in it. If those powers are seen as unlimited, the court said that Parliament would cease to be an authority under the Constitution. Rather, it would become a supreme over it because it will have the power to alter the entire Constitution, including the basic structure. Also, this doctrine serves a check on the constituent power of the Parliament, the fundamental concept that has preserved the Indian democracy. Otherwise, an unchecked parliamentary power may have turned India into a totalitarian state. Retaining the fundamental principles of the Constitution, which our founding fathers so painstakingly crafted, is beneficial. It gives citizens the fundamental rights that no state organ can alter itself by restricting the legislative branch's ability to amend the laws. Thus, being dynamic in nature, this doctrine is more progressive and open to changes in time, unlike the rigid nature of earlier judgments. The doctrine of basic structure is a crucial part of the Indian Constitution, protecting its core values and principles. While it has its fair share of advantages, such as preserving constitutional democracy, it also has a few drawbacks, such as creating a power imbalance between the judiciary and legislature. But ultimately, the doctrine is essential in maintaining the integrity and stability of the Indian Constitution, and its significance cannot be overstated. Now, moving on to the second article of the day, which appeared in the Explained section of the Indian Express on 25th of April this week, and highlights that the sale of urea crossed a record of 35.7 million tons in the previous fiscal year. The consumption of urea did dip in the initial 2 years after the neem coating was fully enforced, that was from December 2015. This neem coating made diversion of urea difficult for use in plywood industries, particle board manufacturing, textile dye, cattle feed, and synthetic milk makers. However, this trend has reversed from the year 2018-19. Urea sales in the year 2022-23 were about 5.1 million ton, higher than 2015-16, whereas it was over 9 million ton higher than the year 2009 and 10, which was before introduction of Nutrient Based Subsidy Scheme or NBS in April 2010. Now, the importance of this topic can be gauged by the fact that UPSC in GS Paper 3 asks about issues related to direct and indirect farm subsidies and minimum support price. The mains exam of the year 2013, a question appeared on agricultural subsidies and required us to critically analyze the agriculture subsidy regime with reference to the distortions created by it. In prelims of the year 2020, a question appeared on chemical fertilizers. The scope of this discussion would first cover the facts regarding fertilizer production in India. Moving forward, we will discuss the issues that are involved with the fertilizer sector in India. Third, we will take a look at the policy support and legislative initiatives by the government to encourage and subsidize the fertilizer use. Further, we will also take an overview of the steps that can be taken to reduce the overuse of urea as well as promote diversification and alternatives. But first, let us understand the facts pertaining to fertilizer production in India. The fertilizers can be classified into three categories. The first are primary fertilizers, which include nitrogenous, phosphatic, as well as potassic fertilizers. The second are the secondary fertilizers, which include calcium, magnesium, and sulfur based fertilizers. The third are micronutrient based fertilizers that have compounds such as iron, zinc, boron, and chlorine. Also, India is the second largest consumer of urea after China. It also ranks second in the production of nitrogenous fertilizers, while it ranks third in the production of phosphatic fertilizers. However, the requirement of potassic fertilizers are met through imports. Fertilizer industries form one of the core 8 industries in index of 8 core industries which are published by DPIIT under Ministry of Commerce and Industry and has a weightage of 2.63%. The subsidy outlay for fertilizers in India was 1.75 lakh crores in this year's budget, which included 1.31 lakh crores for urea subsidy as well as 44,000 crores for nutrient based subsidy or NBS. The regulation of sale, price, and quality of fertilizers is undertaken through Fertilizer Control Order of the year 1957, while Fertilizer Movement Control Order of 1977 regulates the distribution of fertilizers throughout the country. Now, what are the issues involved regarding fertilizers in India? The first and the most highlighted issue is the fertilizer subsidy, as the government has a high fiscal burden of rupees 1.75 lakh crores every year. Also, there is a large unpaid subsidy backlogs that questions the sustainability of this current regime. Further, there is an import dependency to meet the domestic requirement of the fertilizers, as India consumes about 55 million metric ton annually and only 72% of this requirement is produced domestically. Also, we see there is an imbalanced use of fertilizers to an extent that the NPK ratio is as much as 25:5:1 as against the ideal of 4:2:1. States such as Punjab and Haryana see imbalanced use of fertilizers, which affect crop yield and deteriorate soil health, thus having an ecological impact of this excessive use, which leads to release of greenhouse gases, contamination of surface and groundwaters respectively. The second issue involved is related to fertilizer companies, as they are dependent on costly feedstock such as natural gas and naphtha for production of fertilizer, which leads to rise in purchase price of natural gas. Further, companies are involved in efficient manufacturing practices, which is also due to subsidy, which is based on cost of production. This subsidy base disincentivizes the company to lower the cost of production. The third is high cannibalization of imports, which create a demand-supply mismatch in the domestic market. Further, there is an absence of price fixation benchmarks at a reasonable level for imports of fertilizers, which delays finalization of contracts. The third issue related to fertilizers are pertaining to governments. The first is that it affects the fiscal state of the government due to large fiscal subsidies of 1.75 lakh crores. The second is due to inaccurate estimation, availability becomes an issue. This is further aggravated by high cannibalization of imports, which creates shortage in domestic markets. Further, diversion of fertilizers for non-agriculture use as well as smuggling to neighboring countries also create a supply gap in the domestic market. The fourth issue pertains to farmers and agriculturalists. This includes that they have to pay high purchase costs to procure fertilizers from black markets. Further, due to underpricing of urea relative to other fertilizers, especially potassium and phosphorus based fertilizers, lead to overuse of urea, which is also apparent from this fact that there is an imbalanced fertilizer used. Now, let us take a look at policy support and legislative measures that have been undertaken by the government to resolve the above mentioned issues. The first policy initiative is a urea subsidy scheme in India, which is a central sector scheme, and the fertilizers are available to farmers at a statutory notified maximum retail price or MRPs. The difference between the delivered cost of fertilizers at farm gate and the net market realization by the urea is given as a subsidy to urea manufacturer or importers by the Government of India. It also includes the freight subsidy for movement of urea across the country. In the year 2018, direct benefit transfer were introduced. The second policy initiative is the new urea policy of the year 2015, which has an objective of maximizing the indigenous production, promoting energy efficiency, and rationalizing the subsidy burden on the government. The third policy initiative is bringing forward the Nutrient Based Subsidy Scheme or NBS, which is a central sector scheme just like the urea subsidy in India. This scheme was launched in the year 2010 when the prices of phosphatic and potassic fertilizers were decontrolled. As against the earlier product specific subsidy regime, NBS encourages the fertilizer manufacturers to fix the MRP themselves at a reasonable price. The center then provides a subsidy based on fixed rate on each nutrient in rupees per kg basis. The fourth initiative is the One Nation, One Fertilizer scheme, also known as Pradhan Mantri Bharatiya Jan Urvar Pariyojana. It intends to bring a single brand and logo which will be used by all manufacturers under the center's fertilizer subsidy scheme. The benefits of this scheme includes subsidy normalization, harmonizing markets, and reducing brand specific demands. Another important policy measure, as we have covered before, was the introduction of neem coated urea. 100% mandatory production of neem coated urea has a certain benefits. These include slow dissolution of urea into soil, which leads to less requirement of urea. Also, it stops the illegal diversion of urea for non-agricultural purposes. Another policy measure was introducing of gas pooling scheme for domestic gas with regasified imported LNGs. This provides natural gas at a uniform delivered price to all grid connected urea manufacturing plants in the country. Further, with introduction of soil health card scheme, the government intended to avoid irrational use of fertilizers. As of today, the scheme coverage includes distribution of 22.5 crores soil health cards. This distribution of soil health card has enhanced the crop yields 5 to 6%, has decreased the use of fertilizers by 8 to 10%, reduced the cost of cultivation by 16 to 25% in case of rice. Further, this has led to saving of approximately 20 kgs per acre of fertilizer for production of rice and 10 kgs per acre for production of pulses. Also, due to this scheme, the soil analyzing capacity of India has increased from 1.78 crores per year to 3.3 crores in last 5 years. Other measures include replacing 50 kg bags of urea with 45 kg ones in March 2018 and launch of liquid nano urea by IFCO in 2021. Now, what are the steps that can be further undertaken to improve the use of fertilizers? The first and the most obvious one is to decanalize the imports, which will allow the fertilizer supply to respond quickly and flexibly to changes in demand. Second is to secure long-time fertilizer supplies from locations where prices are cheap, such as Russia. The third is to rationalize the subsidies along with a dedicated awareness generation programs for farmers regarding the benefits of balanced use of fertilizers. Further, direct benefit of transfers can be undertaken for farmers to provide them a fertilizer cash subsidy of up to 5,000 per year as was recommended by Commission for Agriculture and Prices. Also, there is a need for improved targeting of poor tenant farmers and sharecroppers for fertilizer subsidies, promoting alternatives to green chemical fertilizers such as green alternatives like biofertilizers, as well as encouraging the use of gypsum and other micronutrients are cost effective and eco friendly measures that can increase the crop yield by 15 to 25%. Also, subsidies can be provided by the central government for these alternatives. Also, if applying more urea is counterproductive, which is manifested in diminishing crop yields, thus the obvious solution now remains is to reduce the consumption of urea. This can be done by two methods. The first, raising the prices of urea. However, increasing the prices is politically difficult. Thus, this brings us to a second approach that involves improving the nitrogen use efficiency of the fertilizer, which will enable the farmers harvest the same or more grain yields with fewer bags of fertilizers. Hence, the government should incorporate the use of ureas or nitrification inhibitors in urea, which will improve the nitrogen use efficiency of the fertilizers. Also, nano urea that has been launched by IFCO before has certain limitations. Thus, if government wants to promote the use of nano urea, it may have to subsidize the cost of spraying for the farmers. Now, as the article highlights the overuse of fertilizers, specifically urea, we have seen certain steps that can be undertaken to promote the balanced use of fertilizers as well as diversify the growth of crops from fertilizer intensive ones to a more eco friendly ones. Now, moving on to the third article of the day, which appeared in the explained section of the Indian Express on 26th of April this week. This article reports about a new mission to develop quantum computers in India. In this regard, Richard Feynman, who was a Nobel Prize winning physicist, he gave a lecture at the MIT's Computer Science and Artificial Intelligence Laboratory in the year 1982. This lecture was later published as a paper titled Stimulating Physics with Computers, in which Feynman proposed the development of a different and a more powerful computer by utilizing the quantum mechanical properties of the matter. This idea is often considered as the original idea behind quantum computers. Now, 4 decades later, quantum computers have become a reality, though they are yet to do anything meaningful. Getting quantum computers to realize the full potential and perform tasks which are impossible or impractical for the conventional computers is one of the hottest areas of research. In this regard, last week, India decided to join this global effort in a big way by setting up of a 6,000 crores national mission on quantum technologies and applications. Development of a homegrown quantum computer is one of the major objectives of this mission. Now, UPSC in GS Paper 3 asks about indigenization of technology and developing new technologies. In this perspective, let us look at the PYQ of the year 2021 in GS Paper 3, where question appeared on blue LEDs and the impact of this invention on everyday life of a human being. Similarly, in the year 2016, a question appeared on nanotechnology and the scope of its application in the development process of the country. While in the prelims, in the year 2022, a question was asked on quantum computing. While in the year 2020, a similar question but on artificial intelligence appeared. Thus, in the scope of this discussion, we will first understand what are quantum computers. Then, we will understand about the properties that quantum matters exhibit. Further, we will also discuss the challenges that are associated in development of quantum computers. Moving on, we will discuss the National Quantum Mission and features regarding this. In the end, we will conclude by establishing the significance of such development on India. Now first, let us understand what are quantum computers. Quantum computers are not just the next generation of faster or more efficient computers. Rather, they are fundamentally a different way of accomplishing the computing task. Conventional computers, when they become more powerful and have much higher capabilities, they become supercomputers. But these supercomputers perform their task in a similar way as the normal home computers or our mobile phones do. Quantum computers are fundamentally different in a way that they handle and process information. They are meant to be useful in some very specific situations where the traditional way of computing are inadequate. However, for more mundane uses like playing a video or browsing the internet, quantum computers do not offer any significant advantage over conventional computers. Let us compare conventional computing to a task of climbing a stairs. If a fitter or a healthier person climbs a building, he can probably go faster or a few stories higher, but eventually he would get exhausted. Hence, in this context, fitter person is a supercomputer. While, on the other hand, using the elevator is a fundamentally different way of accomplishing the task of climbing the building. There's a significant gain in speed, but the main advantage is the ability to access floors that would be out of reach or extremely inefficient for a person to climb. While at the same time, in certain situations, for example, when there are only 2 floors to climb, elevator might not offer a certain great advantage. Thus, quantum computers deal with the task where traditional computing are found to be inadequate. But these computers, they exhibit a different form of properties. What are these properties? Let's have a look. While elevators rely on machines and electricity to perform a task which is too difficult for a human being to complete, quantum computer, on the other hand, exploits the very special properties of matter for calculations which are beyond the capabilities of ordinary computers. Small particles, which are the size of an atom or its constituents, exhibit a number of strange properties that goes entirely against our everyday experiences. For example, these particles can exist at a multiple location at the same time. This phenomena is referred to as superposition. The moment they are observed at one place, they cease to exist at all other places. Then, there is a property called entanglement. It refers to the ability of a particle instantaneously influence the behavior of another atom with whom it had an earlier interaction. Research on entangled particles won Physics Nobel in the last year. Conventional computers store and handle processes in bits. A bit is the smallest unit of data that a computer can handle. It can take just 2 values, that is either 0 or 1, but only of this one value can be taken at a time. A 0 would result in a certain set of instructions to be carried out, while a 1 would lead to different set of instructions. All data in the computers, including text, pictures and videos, are broken down into sequences of zeros and ones for purpose of storage and processing. In a 2-bit system, in a conventional computer, it can have 4 stages, but only one stage is possible at one particular time. To go through all of these 4 states, a computer has to take 4 steps. While a more powerful computer can speed up the process, it would still have to go through these 4 steps. This is where a quantum computer do things differently. Superposition makes it possible for a quantum bit or a qubit to exist in both 0 and 1 at the same time. Similarly, for a 2-qubit system, it can have 4 states at the same time. Some part 0, 0, some part 0, 1, some part 1, 0, and the remaining 1, 1. What it means that a quantum computer can go through these 4 stages in one step, unlike a conventional computer which requires 4 steps. As more qubits are added, processing capability of a quantum computer it increases exponentially. With just few qubits, say for example 50, quantum computers can outpace traditional computers that perform a couple of billion operations per second. Tasks that conventional computers would take millions of years to finish, it can be finished in a matter of seconds with a quantum computer. Such tasks are found in variety of domains like internet and data security and health research. and this is where the main use of quantum computers lie. However, as quantum computing development is still in its nascent stages, it has become apparent that this development faces certain challenges. Apart from challenges in building a quantum computer, there are certain extreme conditions that are required to be met. These include requirement of cold temperatures and extreme isolation, and because of these extreme conditions, there are significant risk of errors. The parallel processing that happens in a superposition states leads to all kind of different results, where only one of the results is correct or desirable. While in other situations, when the superposition breaks down, the final outcome is randomly selected from a range of possibilities. But this would make the quantum computer totally useless. Error correction and the ability to guide the computer to produce the correct result as a more favored option is one of the ongoing areas of research, and there's still more research to go for it to be perfect. Now, let us take an overview of the National Quantum Mission, or the NQM. The Union Cabinet this week approved a National Quantum Mission, putting India among the 6 top leading nations in the world which are involved in research and development of quantum technologies. NQM is planned during the year 2023 to 2031, is worth of more than 6,000 crore rupees, and will mainly work towards strengthening India's research and development in quantum arena, alongside indigenously building quantum-based computers, which are far more powerful to perform the most complex of problems in a highly secure manner. Under the NQM, there are 4 broad themes. The first is quantum computing, the second is quantum communication, the third is quantum sensing and metrology, and the fourth is quantum material devices. Thematic hubs for each will be established at the research institutes and R&D centers who are already working in this field of research. Further, NQM will also entail developments of satellite-based secure communications between a ground station and a receiver located within 3,000 kilometers in the first 3 years. For satellite-based communication within Indian cities, NQM will also lay down communication lines using quantum key distribution over 2,000 kilometers. For long-distance quantum communication, especially with other countries, tests will be also conducted in the coming years. The mission will also focus on developing quantum computers with physical qubit capacities ranging 50 to 1000 qubits. Computers having up to 50 qubits of processing power will be developed in the first 3 years, whereas 50 to 100 qubit computer will be developed in 5 years, and computers with up to 1000 qubits capacity will be developed in 8 years. Now, what is the significance of such a mission? The first is that the National Quantum Mission will help India in taking a quantum leap forward in the areas of research. It will also have a wide scale applications ranging from healthcare and diagnostics, defense, energy, and data security. The Department of Science and Technology will lead this mission and will be supported by other departments. The effort of Department of Science and Technology is to work towards building an ecosystem which will favor quantum technology in the country. There's an excitement in the scientific community about this quantum mission because it allows India to join a global technology development race when it is still in the nascent stages. Several scientific groups in the country are already working on quantum computers and related technologies. A collaborative effort between Tata Institute of Fundamental Research, Defense Research and Development Organization, or the DRDO, and the Tata Consultancy Services, or the TCS, these three are developing a 7-qubit quantum computer. Much more powerful quantum computers having a few hundred qubits have been developed in other countries. However, none of these have yet performed calculations which are beyond the capabilities of a regular computer. Thus, one of the objectives of NQM is to build a 1000-qubit computer in the next 8 years. Thus, emerging technologies such as quantum computing offers a great significance in the development of communications and computing in the country. Thus, it is imperative for the government to spend and ensure collaboration between public and private sector for development of quantum computers.